She's having a... Oh, okay, that was the bell. I think we got some lollygaggers in the lobby. I don't get to say that word very often. Okay. Chris, can you start us with a prayer?
Heavenly Father, we praise your name. We thank you for this evening and this chance to study your word. Thank you for the book of Revelation and just the lessons that we learned from it. God, help us to apply them in our lives and help us to be able to refute those that might go off on tangents with it. But God, help us most of all to dive into your word and to just study what you would have us learn. Please be with Jady as he leads us and be with each of us this evening. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Ephesus had the wrong emphasis. Smyrna was about to be burned. Pergamum needed to purge their Balaam. Thyatira tolerated a tyrant. Sardis' reputation was tarnished. Philadelphia, they were pillars definitely. Laodicea, it's the lukewarm city. It's the 7 churches of Asia. Okay, very good. You guys are great. Okay. The seals is God's plan for judgment and redemption. What were the trumpets in a word? Warning. Wake-up call to repent. What do we call this? The heart of the book, the centerpiece, 12 through 14. In a word? War. Very, very good. The great sign, the 7 characters, war. And then what's the bowls of wrath, which we're about to look at? What's that in a word? Wrath. Yeah, you know what? It didn't come up there. Sorry. Yeah, that should be the word wrath. The bowls of wrath. So that's chapter 16. So if you're new to this class, you're certainly welcome. Glad to have you here. We're at the part of the show where we are flying through the book as fast as possible. We're going to try to cover several chapters tonight, just because we just have tonight and one more class left. And the update on that in terms of future Revelation studies is we decided, since we're going to be recording them, we're actually going to do Revelation on Tuesday evenings at the Church Hills study, Tuesdays at 7 o'clock at the Church Hills. And so we're going to be doing that study there a couple weeks or so. And so those will be recorded, and you can go back and listen to those detailed studies of the rest of the book. But here, we're just doing a big picture overview. So chapter 16 here are the bowls of God's wrath. And this is it. This is kind of what we've been waiting for, kind of. Well, not exactly. It is what we've been waiting for in the sense of it's the completion of this series, the trumpet, that final trumpet brought then these 7 bowls, and now the 7 bowls have come. And so this is God's kind of final wrath. In fact, it says that it indicates the wrath of God is finished in that sense. So that's God's wrath on this nation. So when these 7 bowls are poured out, a voice from the throne is going to say, it is done. This is finished. This is not a partial judgment like we've seen before. The beginning, the seal, is 1/4. Remember that in the trumpets it was 1/3 of this, 1/3 of that. But it's going to be full judgment, full destruction. So this is the destruction of the Roman Empire or the Roman city in symbolic terms. The idea there. However, it's not really the end, because we're going to get another picture, and we're going to look at all this before the book is done. Have we seen that in the book of Revelation where it tells us something, and then it gives that same thing kind of a different perspective? How about, behold, it's the lion, and when he shows up, it's a lamb. How about, here's the numbered people of God, 144,000. Then the next paragraph there, the unnumbered people of God, they're innumerable. So we're going to have the destruction here, but then we're going to kind of get the whole thing from a different angle. So, like like a replay, we might call it, but it's a replay from a different perspective. Okay, correlation between the seven bowls and seven trumpets. If you're reading in chapter 16, here you get the earth that receives this judgment boils on them all. The sea, and then everything dies. There, the fresh water, that all turns to blood. The sun is strengthened, so it scorches people. The fifth is the throne of the beast receives this judgment poured out on the throne of the beast. Darkness, then, now the sun goes to darkness, and there is anguish, especially because it boils. And then number 6, the sixth one is that the way the army from the east comes, and they all assemble for battle. And so you're going to see this army again coming from the east, coming to bring judgment or God's people in tumult. And then number 7 is finished, earthquake, hail. Babylon drinks the wine of God's wrath. Now, that's just a summary of chapter 16, the 7 bowls of wrath, of when this kind of literary, symbolic, biblical picture of what God's going to do, bringing about this wrath. Here's just one I want to show you real quick, just how closely correlated those are with the 7 trumpets that we saw. The 7 trumpets were chapters 8 and 9. I say that. First one, a third of the earth. Does that correlate with the first? Does the first trumpet correlate with the first bowl? Yes. Third of the sea. Does that correlate? Yes. Third of fresh water. Does that correlate? Yes. Third of the heavens and the sun. Yes. Okay. The fifth one, which is chapter 9, the scorpion locusts from the abyss, they darken the sky and bring torment. Does that correlate with anguish, torment, darkness? It does. So there's a correlation there. And then this one again, in number 6 is there's the army from the east that kills a third of mankind, whereas the 6th bowl is a way now for the army from the east. Again, same idea, same correlation kind of thing. And the 7th trumpet then is really kind of the 7 bowls. So that idea. Okay, so in chapter 16 you have this. Just are you, O Holy One, who is and who was, for you brought these judgments. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets. You've given them blood to drink, is what they deserve. And I heard the altar saying, Yes, Lord God Almighty, true and just are your judgments. See this emphasis on the justice of God? What is the sin here that's being highlighted of what the Roman Empire was guilty of? The blood of the saints. And so, because they've shed blood, what has God given back to them? Blood to drink. So just are these judgments. That's the idea. True and just are your judgments. This goes back to chapter 15, verse 3. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. And so here's the idea. God is not overreacting in these bowls of wrath. He's being very just. He's returning on them the deeds of their own head. And so this is God bringing his just judgment. The nations really are getting what they deserve. God is acting in holiness and justice in his judgment. That really becomes an idea here that is important for us to see. This is not God flying off the handle. This is not God losing it. This is God in justice and truth bringing about these judgments. Okay, so that kind of wraps up that section. Any questions or thoughts there in chapter 16? So then 17 through 19. Now, it may be better in your mind to think of it as 17 and 18, because it just kind of bleeds into 19 a little bit there. And so if you want to, these final 3 sections of the book, you may want to think 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. But really, this section does go into 19 here. We're going to call this section the harlot versus the bride, or another common is the quote from here, fallen is Babylon. Okay, so this Babylon idea here. This is clearly a new section. This is chapter 17, verse 1. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, Come, I'll show you the judgment of the great prostitute who's seated on many waters. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. Do you see how that transition really shows this kind of a new section, a new vision? Come, I'll show you this. And he carried me away. And so, this is this new section. So again, it's basically 17 and 18, a little bit into 19 here. The harlot versus the bride is the idea. So the section starts with the harlot, whose name is Babylon, and it ends with the holy bride of Christ and the marriage feast of the Lamb. So that's the idea. So let us rejoice and exult. 19, verse 7. Let us rejoice and exult, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with white linen, bright and pure. Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And so that's, those first verses into chapter 19. But you see this idea of, it starts with the picture of the harlot in the wilderness, and then it ends with the picture of the bride. Now, the focus is all on the harlot. The focus is not on, the emphasis is not on the bride, but that's clearly how the section rounds out to end this section in 17 and 18. Okay. Chapter 17, verses 1 through 6. Does someone want to read those verses nice and loud?
Then one of the seven angels who have the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of those sexual immorality the dwellers on the earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in a spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of the sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of the prostitutes of the earth's abominations. Did you say through 6?
Yeah.
And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled greatly.
Okay, so Babylon the harlot here is described. It says that's the name that's on her forehead. There's an ancient source that spoke of that when prostitutes in a brothel would actually have like their name like on their forehead, like a bandana type thing. It may be reference to that we don't know a ton about that. But here you have the name Babylon the Great, and she is this this woman decked out here. So this description of Babylon the harlot is only used at the end of the book of Revelation. I think that's helpful to see. Here's kind of the stats on that. The word Babylon in the book of Revelation. It's only at the end of the book, 14 through 18. This section. Remember how back in chapter 14 had those summaries of the rest of the book? It was like this paragraph is about chapters 15 and 16 that. And so that's the introduction. That first time we see the word Babylon the Great, which was a city, talked about in the Old Testament, but Babylon the Great, that's in chapter 14, forecasting this section here. The word Babylon shows up exactly 6 times in the book of Revelation. Coincidence? That's the idea. Remember, 6 is the insufficient. The beast doesn't number up to the 777 of God. So the first time was in the summary section of chapter 14, which was broadcasting the end of the book. All 6 times the word Babylon shows up, it's accompanied by the word great. Babylon the great city, or something like that. And it's always in association with this she, this harlot. It's always in the context. And so Babylon the harlot, the great city, is, in this book, the term Babylon is fairly narrow. It's not even at the end of the book. It's wrapped up with the end of this section in chapter 18. No surprise that a city is referred to as a female. Ancient cities were thought of as female. Think like daughters of Zion in the Old Testament, kind of like the mother of their people. The word city in Hebrew was a feminine noun. So no surprise that a city would be represented as a woman, but the description here is what's kind of so vivid of this. Okay. How is Babylon the harlot described? What are some of the descriptions we saw here in these verses? What's that? Clothed in purple and scarlet and Gold, precious stones, and pearls. Very good. We're going to see all of those in the slide in a second. Anything else that describes her here? Yeah, Ryan.
She sits on many waters.
Sits on many waters, which is a direct reference to Babylon. I don't remember. I want to say Jeremiah 52, but that's an Old Testament reference. Babylon sits on many waters. Golden cup full of abominations, absolutely, and maybe a little bit in there, the blood of the saints, because it's just he's drunk on the blood of the saints. Yeah, Dixon.
The great prostitute.
The great prostitute, the mother of prostitutes, mother of the earth's abominations, and so kind of that grand description of her sinfulness. Yes.
I think it's interesting that he saw her in the wilderness.
Yes. So where was the last time we saw the wilderness in Revelation? Someone fled to the wilderness. The woman with child, the people of God. So again, that kind of highlights this contrast with, I don't know all of what's going on. There may be a lot that I do not appreciate about that, but I do think at the very least it creates a connection between the people of God, the woman who represents God's people, who's in the wilderness, versus Babylon, the harlot, who's in the wilderness. So here's a graphic description, no pun intended, but like a graphic description there of the woman riding on the beast, the red beast. It says, no one said this. Verse 3, the woman is sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, 7 heads, 10 horns. Have we met a red beast in Revelation with 7 heads and 10 horns? What have we been calling that beast? So the dragon is Satan, and this is not so much a dragon as a beast. And it's the one like the book of Daniel. And in Daniel, did the animals come up out of the water or out of the land? The water. So this is one called the sea beast earlier here. Okay. So in this section, 17 and 18, with a little bit of 19, you have the contrast of the harlot Babylon with the bride of Christ. She's the great prostitute with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality. The woman was arrayed in purple, scarlet, adorned with gold, jewels, pearls, luxurious, the top money living, holding in her hand a golden cup full of the abominations and impurities of her sexual immorality. Contrast that with the bride of Christ. This is in that section at 19 that wraps this up. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure. The fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. Now this is going forward a little bit to the section that actually highlights the bride of Christ, which is Revelation 21 and 22. But there it says, "Come, I'll show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. He carried me away to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city of Jerusalem with every kind of jewel. 12 gates were made of 12 pearls, each of the gates of a single pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold like transparent glass." I'm just going to make a couple contrasts here. The harlot is described as committing sexual immorality, whereas the righteous, the bride of Christ, described as the righteous deeds of the saints. She's wearing purple and scarlet. The bride of Christ is wearing fine linen, bright and pure. So this is interesting. The harlot has gold, jewels, and pearls. Does the bride of Christ have gold, jewels, and pearls? She does. Absolutely, gold, jewels, and pearls. So what's the difference? The difference, I think, is the harlot has her luxury now, all her good stuff now, whereas we are waiting our treasure in heaven when that is to come. But we're not decked out in finery, luxuriousness now. That's going to come. So here's, I think, the idea. The harlot is impure. The Christians are to be pure. The harlot has her finery now, and Christians have their treasure waiting for them in heaven. So I think that's kind of the idea there of the contrast between them. Okay, so we have been talking about these tools of the dragon to tempt the saints. The dragon is Satan. He's trying to tempt the world. And so we said there was going to be a third one, and so we're going to add to that the harlot here. So remember, what was our description of the sea beast and kind of what kind of temptation that represented to the Christians? That's going to be the false prophet, but I'm looking for a word that ends with shun. T-I-O-N kind of shun. Remember that? The word for the military, brute force, that was coercion. Coercion, physical force. And then the false prophet, what does that kind of represent? Satan's tool. Not coercion, but deception. Very good, very good. False religion. And I said there's going to be a third shun word here, and that is seduction, is the idea. I think it's a really powerful point for us to make. Lust and pleasure. And so you think about that, Satan's toolbox. He will seduce with temptation, make that look so good. He will deceive through false religion, and when he needs to, he'll force people into that. These are different tools, and these are symbols. It was not literally a seven-headed beast that came up out of the ocean, and false religion was not literally taught by a lamb, and there was not literally a harlot riding on a beast. The point, though, is this graphically illustrates for us Satan's tools and how powerful they can be in the world to bring about his devices. So we don't go out of here looking for a prostitute sitting on a seven-headed beast. We look for, what are the ways that the world is trying to seduce me, bring me in through lust and pleasure. I think you'll see that here. Notice how the focus here in these chapters, how Babylon, this prostitute, lured that world 2,000 years ago, lured that world into compromise and worldly desire, covetousness and lust. And by lust, I don't just mean sexual lust. I just mean general worldly desire. You might say the promise of the good life here. Look at how it describes that in these chapters of 17 and 18. Babylon luring the world into compromise and worldly desire. 17 verses 1 and 2. I'll show you the judgment of the great prostitute seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, with the wine of whose sexual morality the dwellers on the earth have become drunk. So drunk on the greatness of their lust for this prostitute. 18:3, for all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. You see that? This idea of she's alluring them with lust and desire, people growing rich off of her making the world wealthy, but with compromise with that. It keeps going. 18:7, and she glorified herself and lived in luxury. So give her a like measure of torment and mourning. What did she do? She glorified herself. She was selfish and lived for herself in this world. And so it's then fair for her to have like measure of torment and mourning. It's just like the rich man and Lazarus, the guy who lived for himself in this world, but then is in torment in the next. 18:9, and the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. So you see this picture of this prostitute Babylon, how she lured the kings of the earth into seduction, into moral compromise, her gods, her filth, and they benefited from it, right? They got to live in luxury with her. And so when this city collapses, all our good stuff is gone. I can't believe the economy collapsed. Remember all the good things we used to get from her? That is the idea here. 18:11 through 13. We're about to talk then. What is it we're talking about here? And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because their market's gone. It's like Amazon.com is open, but no one's buying. Since no one buys their cargo anymore, cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense. See, it keeps going and going. It's a big marketplace list, right? Myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, and chariots, and slaves, that is, human souls. So I'll make this observation, maybe no surprise of the connection that we're going to make here. Bowing to Roman rule and religion brought such prosperity to the ancient world. Rome was wealthy, and so they were able to go there, sell their things, and kind of create this luxurious prosperity for themselves. And specifically want to highlight this here, slaves notable. The city of Rome had a huge slave population. They estimate that 50% of people living in the city of Rome were slaves. Huge slave population there. And so this idea of the slave trade and treating people cruelly and just treating them like they were property, that's part of the judgment of God here, is their treatment of people. And that slave trade was huge and hugely problematic at times in the Roman Empire. And so, what's the point? Well, we'll get to that. I'm comparing this to Rome. I really think that that's the idea here, is this is the city of Rome. But let's think about the spiritual points here. This is so practical for us. The allure of riches and the allure of the pleasure of this world continue to tempt people, right? Do we have any places of wealth in our world today where people want to go and indulge and live the exciting life in the big city? Does that sound like anything today? Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a huge point from these two chapters here. So this is obvious. When we lived in New York, I mean, we would see people show up. It's August. Every year in August, we'd have kids showing up to go to college there. We'd never see them again. And they were trying to make it big in theater, trying to make it big here or there. Total compromise, asked to do things Christians should not do. We would just never see these kids again. It was like, it's August. There's the kid. There's his parents. Then there'd be the embarrassing moment then I don't know. Thanksgiving shows up, and there they are again with their parents again. The only reason they're back at church is because their parents are in town, that kind of thing. It's like the prodigal son. It's the big city, the bright lights, the desire, the anonymity, the availability of lust, the availability of worldly things. It's the prodigal son who sees that distant, intoxicating city. And what do people do in the Babylons of today? They go there and they sell out so that they can make it big. I didn't look up who sang the song from the 70s, Like a Rhinestone Cowboy. Who was that? You guys all know that song, yeah. And I don't know that song super well, but what's the line in there? There's been a load of compromising on the road to my horizon. Does that rhyme with compromising? I guess it does. Do you see the idea? What's that? Depends on how you say it. That's the idea, isn't it? There's been a load of compromising on the road to my horizon. I mean, that's the world. That's the Babylon of our day today. That's how it was 2,000 years ago. You go there, you sell yourself out so that you can make it big. Are there other ways that the world pressures us to sell out for worldly success and pleasure? Absolutely. You don't have to go to New York for that very same thing. Pressure for this world, pressure for worldly success, desire for the good life, the pleasurable things, and so we sell out. And that's pornography right there. Desire for pleasure, and we sell ourselves out for those things. So enjoying worldly media, worldly jobs that we shouldn't have, having a job that no Christian should have, working more than we need to have more stuff, to try to live the good life down here, compromises to have a more pleasurable life. And this is very practical, but that's what Babylon the harlot represents, is selling out to the world. And here you have this big marketplace, the big city, and that's the idea. And so interestingly, think about these three. Which of these three, coercion or false religion deception or seduction, is the most prevalent in our culture right now? I think there's a lot of false religion deception. No doubt about that. But I think your average American is in love with number 3 here, is bowing down to number 3. Just the desire for pleasure, the desire for the good life, and just, to want the economy to be great. What's our line? Is the economy stupid? And so that's the world we live in. So this should feel very practical of the seduction of the world and all of that. So this is very similar to Old Testament descriptions of other world empires in the Old Testament who encourage nations to sell out and join their immorality. Notice the harlot prostitute descriptions of these world empires. So this is Nahum 3 through 4. We'll be doing a Nahum class third quarter this year. So you can think if you want to be in that class later on this year. Nahum 3, verse 1. Woe to the bloody city Nineveh, all full of lies and plunder, no end to the prey, and all for the countless whorings of the prostitute, graceful and of deadly charms, who betrays nations with her whorings and people with her charms. You see that? What did Nineveh, which was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, 800 years before Christ or so, and none around there. What was she described as? A prostitute who betrays nations and seduces them, but of course, just drawing them into her paganism was a bad thing. Isaiah 23:17, at the end of 70 years, the Lord will visit Tyre, and she will return to her wages and will prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. Tyre was the shipping experts of the ancient world. Before Rome did their thing, the kings of the Mediterranean Sea were the people of Tyre, and they were the ones transporting stuff. So that no wonder why Revelation here quotes sections in the Old Testament that have reference to Tyre, because they were the shipping magnate. That's the word that keeps coming to mind. Is it the word shipping magnate? You know what I'm talking about? Isn't that a word? You're like, no, that's not a word. Yes, Chris says that's a word. Yeah. So that's why Rome looks like Tyre. It's the very same thing. But what did she do? She prostituted herself with all the nations, kingdoms of the world. Nineveh, Tyre, Babylon are all described in the Old Testament as prostitutes who lured the world into sin. So these are these worldly empires. So the Babylon of Revelation 17 and 18 is not the first description of a world empire who is described as a prostitute, who drags the world into lust and desire, to cooperate, and let's all just make our deal with the devil to enjoy ourselves down here, kind of thing. Okay, so what does the harlot Babylon represent? 17:9, this calls for mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated, and Rome was known as the city of 7 hills. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. In the days of the writing of this, 2,000 years ago, what was the great city that had dominion over the kings of the earth? It was Rome. I mean, just very clearly description of Roman power. So what does the harlot Babylon represent? I think it represents the city of Rome and kind of what it stood for. Its corrupting influence over the world. And so this is like the cultural influence. This is like the seduction of cooperation with Rome. Not so much the Roman Empire, the Roman military, the sea beast, that idea of brute force. This is, I think, a different way to look at their situation. It's another way of looking at the situation the Christians found themselves in. There's a sense in which Rome shows up in Asia as a force, right, in military boats, like the sea beast, to muscle their way, to crush the opposition. But there's another sense in which Rome is that big city out there. I can go take advantage of that, and I can cooperate with her and secure myself this nice life here. It's that allure of the big city. And so it's just kind of a different way to look at the situation of their day. I'll just make this observation. In modern empires, we tend to have a country that rules over other countries, like 150 years ago, when the United Kingdom ruled over all over the world, right? You have India. They ruled over until the 20th century. Well, Rome was not a country that ruled over other countries. Rome was a city that ruled over other countries. And all its lands were conquered people who hated her and loved her, hated the fact that they were subjugated, hated the fact they had to, pay their tribute or do what they said, but then they also kind of benefited from her. So it's that kind of relationship of the people. Okay, I've been talking a lot here. Comments or questions that you guys have about this? Yeah, Brian.
You had a couple points in there about the 7 hills. That's the geographical center of Rome, right? It's the foundation of Rome, and she's seated right in the middle. So that's a clear indication. Anybody that would in at the time, they know of the city of 7 hills, right? You described it 7.
Yes, seated as 7 hills. Yeah.
And the same thing about the water. You mentioned the parallel of Babylon, but the parallel is to Rome, because it was the modern day Babylon, not just in size, but in water. And it still is today. The aqueducts are still flowing through the city. Even the houses and the latrines have constant flowing water. That's how they lived. It was a city of water, literally everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, and it really carries that idea of Tyre with the shipping and the power on the sea and that kind of idea. And there's more to say about all this, of course. We'll hopefully cover that in the Tuesday night class. This is obviously a quick overview. Mike, did you have a comment?
Yeah, even you see the influence of Rome with the Hellenistic Jews in the New Testament. So everybody was influenced by it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what we have here in this section is probably the best single verse summary of Revelation. If you had a better teacher, I would have had you memorize this verse this quarter. 17:14, they will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. So it's a great verse, a beautiful verse there. These people in the world, they will make war on the Lamb, on the Christians, but the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords, the King of kings, and Christians, those with him, are called and chosen and faithful. So this brings us to kind of, again, the summary of these three end sections of Revelation. 17 through 19, or if you want to say 17 and 18, 2 and 2 and 2. It is the harlot versus the bride. The section ends with them speaking of the bride, clothed in white garments, the righteous deeds of the saints, that idea. So then 19 and 20, Christ comes in judgment, the destruction of the beasts, the destruction of the dragon. That's 19 and 20. And then the book ends with the New Jerusalem, the bride of Christ. So here at the end of the book, you really do have, I wish that chapter 18 went a little bit further, but, so it'd be 17 and 18, the harlot versus the bride. And then 19 and 20 is that Christ comes in judgment, and then 21 and 22. So these kind of final three sections do break down fairly well there in the book. So, of course, we're about to wrap up class tonight, and we just have one more class. But that's kind of where we're at in all this. Comments? Okay. So, chapter 19 and 20, Christ comes in judgment. You have another famous image from the book of Revelation. One of the more well-known images is, now this is the beginning of the next section. It starts in verse 7, but it's the next section. I'm sorry. I think I have the verses wrong on the quote. It does start in verse 11. Sorry. It starts in verse 11 like it says at the top. Okay, Christ comes in judgment. This is the picture of Christ riding forward in victory on the white horse. And then I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire. On his head are many diadems. He has a name written that no one knows but himself. He is clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and the name by which he's called is the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury, the wrath of God the Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So that's the picture here of Christ riding forward, which is kind of the introduction to these final showdowns. There aren't really much of a showdown. In this section, we might say now war comes against the beasts. So they've been warring against the saints, but now it's war comes to the beasts, war comes to the wicked of the world, and war comes against the dragon. So when Christ shows up, how difficult is this battle? What we find out is it is nothing. There's basically no resistance. Okay, so this is where look at verse 19. I saw the beasts and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who was sitting on the horse and against his army. And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who in his presence had done the signs which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur, and the rest were slain by the sword that came from the mouth of him who was sitting on the horse, and all the birds were gorged with their flesh. Okay. I put these verse numbers up there to kind of help us to see this. Christ shows up, and there's the battle lines. The beast, that's of course this Roman Empire military. The beast, the kings of the earth and their armies are there to wage war against Christ and against his army. And then what's the very next statement? The beast is captured, and the false prophet, and everyone else dies. It's like there's no battle. There's nothing even exciting to say, because when Christ shows up to do the job, it's not even an exciting story at that point. It's just so easy. It's easier than anything. So there's basically no resistance when Christ shows up. And so here we go. The beast is captured, and the false prophet, and these two are thrown alive into the lake of fire. And so that's really the destruction. Again, there's another way to look at this picture of the destruction of the beast and the false prophet, the Roman Empire there. So is that it? The beasts have been destroyed, right? These beasts have been doing this damage. So doesn't that end the book? Is that the first bell? Doesn't that end the book? I mean, Revelation should be over, right? Because the Roman Empire has been dealt with. Well, it doesn't, because we're given this brief, though it's symbolic, this brief description of the time once Rome is described, and that time between when Rome is gone to when the Lord returns. I would say that's the period of time we're living in now. So we're given here in chapter 20 this brief description of when Rome is destroyed, and then there's a period of time before the Lord returns again. It's described here as Christ reigning for 1,000 years. Many call this the millennium, or the millennial reign of Christ. That's how it's described here. So in other words, what's going on here in chapter 20 is there's a long length of time from when Rome goes down until the end of the world. The point is not that it's exactly 1,000 years. Have we seen anything in Revelation that's exactly the numeric value? No, it's just to describe a long time. And so Rome goes down, and so Christ is reigning over this world, and he's going to come back again. And it describes that as the 1,000 years. It's not a literal 1,000 years. And we're in that time period right now. God's not telling us how long it's going to be. It's just the quote-unquote the 1,000 years. We're in this time currently. Roman Empire has been destroyed, but we're waiting for the second coming of Christ. And so in this millennial reign, here's what we learn. Satan is bound, so he cannot deceive the nations in the same way. Look at chapter 20, verses 1 through 3. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and the great chain. He seizes the dragon, that ancient serpent who's the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years in the abyss. Threw him in the pit, shut it, and sealed it over him so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years are ended. After that, he'll be released for a little while. And so this is the time frame we're looking at that we're kind of living in now. Satan's been bound, so he can't deceive nations in the same way. How does that work? Is Satan still prowling around like a roaring lion? Yeah, I mean, that was like half my sermon on Sunday, right? The Satan's still doing these things. So what is going on here? Maybe this is about supernatural things of Satan ending, things like demon possession that we saw in the first century, or maybe things like the demon possession of fortune tellers in Philippi or other places. Who knows? Who knows what Satan was doing? So is it about supernatural things which would tie into deception? Is it about the fact that the persecution of the saints has been restrained? I don't mean Christians haven't been persecuted the past 2,000 years, but we've not had one empire that rules over the whole known world that is trying to destroy Christians. Because when China is oppressing Christians, there's still all kinds of places in the world where Christianity is doing its thing. And when things go down in America in the next however many years, there's going to be other places in the world where Christianity, this was like everywhere Christianity was, is the world is against it. And so maybe that's part of it. He's restrained to not be able to have that unified effect, and until kind of the time of the end there. Christ is reigning, and it describes that the souls under the altar are blessed. They're raised up in some way. I don't know exactly what's going on there, that's for sure. But all these souls that have been crying out for justice under the altar, way back in those seals, the souls that are saying, God, how long until you're going to avenge our blood? Those people are blessed. They're raised up in some way there. So that's kind of the situation. So after, we're about to end, aren't we? Okay, comments or questions on any of that? On that Ryan?
Do you think it might have also been potentially a reference to how Rome was the culture, the power that actually, quote unquote, killed Jesus, and dealt the final blow, and then actually, Satan was permitted to do that?
That may be part of it. I don't see that as receiving emphasis in the book of Revelation, though. You might tie chapter 11 with that. That's the city where Christ died. But I think even that is, you know, I mean, Pilate didn't know what he was doing. I mean, he knew what he was doing, but he didn't know what he was doing, you know. Yeah, Justin.
How did the Roman Empire end? I don't know the history of it very well, but I didn't think it was a dramatic cliff event. I thought it was more of a long, slow infiltration, I'll say, from other, both economic sources and other
Yes,
ways.
great question. Excellent question. Yes, so the answer to that is yes. It was really more of like a slow decline. You did have a couple sacks by the Vandals and the Goths, not the people in the 90s like we had that dressed in black. The Goths and the Visigoths in Europe that came down. So Rome was sacked a couple times, which I think this may be alluding to that kind of thing. But the bigger answer to your question is this language fits the same language of destruction of Old Testament judgments where really the same thing happened. So God says, Babylon, you're going to be destroyed. Guess what? Babylon was kind of destroyed, but then the next chapter in Daniel's still in Babylon, and it's still... So we don't, because of those Old Testament similarities, we don't have to look at this as like they're just toast. Because I think they fell in a similar way to the way Old Testament nations fell, with the exact same wording applied to them. So you're asking a very important question, but I think that's the best answer to that. Yeah. Thank you all for your participation.